Hey guys, welcome to another whiskey review. My name is Andrew. Tonight we've got a bourbon that most of you have probably all heard of. We have the infamous Booker's Bourbon. Booker's Bourbon, if you don't know, is produced by the Jim Beam Distillery, headquartered in Claremont, Kentucky. And Booker's is the barrel-proof, uncut and unfiltered, most premium level whiskey in Beam's small batch portfolio that also includes whiskeys like Knob Creek, Basil Hayden's, Baker's. That's all of them I can think of right now. So, what can I tell you about Booker's? Well, like I mentioned, it is uncut and it is unfiltered. Beam tries to market this very hard as a premium bourbon. If you have been in whiskey for much more than a year, then you remember at the end of last year when Beam announced that they were going to premiumize Booker's and increase its price tag from a suggested retail of $55 to $60 to upwards of $100 a bottle. In addition, they also announced that they were going to take this down from 6 yearly batches to 4 yearly batches. Rightfully so, the bourbon community threw a huge fit about that, and we get to 2017, and luckily Beam retracted the new MSRP, but what that whole thing really did was kind of give stores a reason to start charging whatever they want for their own quantities of Booker's. And so what used to be something that commonly sat on shelves for $50 to $60 now still is pretty easy to find, but you can see it some places still for $50 to $60, but more commonly closer to about $70 now. Now that being said, in the current bourbon market, that still puts Booker's fairly in line with its other barrel-proof bourbon peers like Stag Jr., Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, Maker's Mark Cask Strength. All of those kind of sit right there in that $55 to $70 range, and it also puts it below those more hyper premium bourbons like E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof, for example, and other more limited edition, highly allocated releases. So, when I look at Booker's on the shelf, I'm really wanting to compare it to those other peers in its price bracket, things like Maker's Mark Cask Strength, Stag Jr., Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. When I thought of Booker's, I wanted to know how it compared to those. All of them being barrel proof, being uncut, unfiltered, essentially being bottled straight from the barrel, albeit in batches. This is a small batch whiskey, not a single barrel. This specific Booker's is batch 2017-1, which is dubbed Tommy's batch. Beam just within the last couple of years started naming each individual batch of Booker's rather than just giving them a batch number. And honestly, I think that's a pretty genius piece of marketing. What it does, even if the names are cheesy or made up or have no relevance at all to the whiskey or its creation, what it does is it makes each batch recognizable and increases each batch's collectability, I think. Rather than, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, it just goes by numbers on the batches, and you got to try and remember, oh, what's this 2015-7 that I had? And Stag Jr. doesn't even put batch numbers. You have to figure out which batch it was by knowing which proof coincides to which batch, which honestly is kind of a pain in the butt. Booker's, I think, is the first to actually name their batches, and like I said, it's, oh, I had no hard times. Oh, I had Off Your Rocker. It makes it a lot easier to recognize the bourbons, and so I think honestly that's a pretty genius piece of marketing. They also come in this giant over-the-top wooden box, heavily decorated. Say what you will about that. Again, I think it's a nice touch by Beam to make Booker stand out amongst its peers, none of which even come in just a standard box or tin However, it does make this really awkward to fit into a grocery bag. Make sure you hold it at the bottom. Booker's bourbon itself, like all of many of Jim Beam's bourbons, not all I should say, has a standard Jim Beam bourbon mash, 77% corn, 13% rye, 10% malted barley. What I do love about Booker's as well is they give you a ton of information about the creation of this whiskey. Right on the label, they tell you this is 64.25% alcohol by volume, or 128.5 proof. They tell you that the youngest whiskey in this batch is 6 years, 4 months, and 6 days old. Now that doesn't mean that's what every whiskey is, it just means that's what the youngest is. And then if you actually get on their website, you can find out exactly where the barrels were drawn from, and you can find out that for this batch, like 41% came from the 6th floor of warehouse E, 13% maybe from the 6th floor of warehouse H, and the last 45 or so% came from the 7th floor of warehouse D. Now that all just sounds kind of irrelevant, but it does tell you one thing. All of those warehouses are 9 floors high, so you have the 6th, and the 7th floor. You can kind of assume then that these barrels were all what you would call from the center cut of the warehouses, relatively speaking, meaning the center floors, I don't know what end of the floors, or if it was towards the middle of the actual floors, but it's common legend in bourbon making that the honey barrels, if you will, the top barrels usually are drawn from the center cut of warehouses. I don't know if that's typical for all Booker's batches or just this one, but I would expect, with Booker's being one of the most premium brands that Beam releases, that they would obviously be picking the very best of their barrels for these releases. Okay, enough information. Let's actually give this a taste. Booker's Bourbon, first batch of 2017, dubbed Tommy's batch. Start with the nose. Immediately I noticed that for being almost 130 proof, there's relatively little tickle or burn or anything suggesting there's a lot of ethanol in this glass when I smell it. Right up front, there's nice, heavy, smooth layers of toasted oak, like mocha, sticky toffee, a toasted nut, toasted peanut probably, and a nice kind of undercurrent of dark fruit bordering probably on citrus. After a little bit of a rest, you'll start to notice some more heavier caramel develop, and that nutty note becomes a little bit sweeter, more reminiscent of a peanut brittle dessert. Overall, I love the nose. It's thick, it's rich, there's a lot of flavor, but it's not confused, it's harmonious, everything, like I said, is acting harmonious with everything else, makes for a really pleasant and enjoyable nose. Being barrel proof, I'll start with the burn here. Relatively speaking, especially upon entry, the burn is minor. It picks up mid-palate. It actually intensifies towards the end of the palate, and it's very warming on the finish. It leaves that nice, actually most whiskey drinkers, myself included, would describe it as kind of a pleasant warming feeling as it goes down your esophagus. That's actually pretty enjoyable. You know, it's like a nice reminder of the hefty dram you just swallowed, is how I think of it. Beyond the burn, which, you know, no water has been added to this, is totally bearable in my opinion, especially compared to some past Booker's batches I've had and some other barrel proof bourbons and scotches that I've had. Completely bearable heat level, easy to sleuth out, loads of flavors under it. Right up front, I got peanut, that kind of peanut brittly note that's pretty standard in most beam bourbons. Like a heavy spiced caramel, more of that dark citrus fruit, maybe verging closer towards cherry here. Let's see what else we can find. On the finish, just crushed peanut butter laden sticky toffee, molasses. That citrusy note has now gone full cherry. I'm going to call it like a heavy spiced cherry syrup here on the finish. And as it lingers, and linger it is, this is what I would call a long and intense finish. It's actually getting slightly vegetal, not in a bad way. And what I mean by vegetal is think like green. I always say the stuff under the bark of a tree. You peel back the dry bark, you get to that green wet stuff inside. Vegetal, grassy. Just a little here, not anywhere near the intensity that you would get in something, say, like a Highland Scotch, but just a little bit. But really, it's those sticky toffee, peanut butter, and molasses notes that really carry through here on the finish. I'm going to add just a little bit of water. I'll see what that does to it, and then I'll give this a final score. Half teaspoon is all. Remember, when you're adding water to any whiskey, you want to go in very small increments. In this case, the heat wasn't distracting in the first place, but we'll see if it kind of calms down the heat. There was so much flavor, easily dissectable, not bunched up, clenched up, hard to sleuth out flavor that was already there without the water, that I'll be interested to see if the water actually kind of mutes out what was already a great flavor profile, or if the water actually adds anything else. On the nose, it's actually slightly more floral, a bit drier, a bit oakier. And with that increased oak presence comes a bit more vanilla as well, but everything else has kind of died down. On the palate, and carrying through on the finish, it's really taken a multi-faceted bourbon, and it's made it pretty two-dimensional. Oak, vanilla. Not sweet vanilla, more of an aromatic or vanilla bean. But those two really, with the water added, oak and vanilla, move on to dominate the palate, dominate the finish. You lose a lot of the peanut brittle. You lose any hints of the fruit, the citrus. Overall, it does make it more of an easy sipper. It eliminates a lot of the ethanol. But like I said, I actually liked that ethanol. It wasn't distracting. It was warming. It was pleasant. Kind of like the bourbon giving you like a big warm bear hug. You don't get that with the water. It doesn't thin the body, but it does thin a lot of those heavier, bulkier flavors. And I don't like that. So I'm going to score this. This will be the score without water, where I think this bourbon really shines. With water, it would be a lower score, so I'm not even going to bother. $91 out of 100. What I would call truly exceptional whiskey here. Anything over 90 is not easy to do in my book. I think of maybe 140 whiskeys now that I've reviewed. This is going to be like number 13 or 14 that has been able to get a 90 or above on my scale. That means this is a truly exceptional whiskey, and I truly do believe that. Just the intensity of the flavor, the cohesiveness of the flavors, And the just overall drinkability of this whiskey. It's thick, it's chewy, it's fun. Like I said, this whiskey is just like a warm, giant bear hug in my mouth, and I love it. For $67, which is how much this bottle cost me, in my personal rule of thumb is if anything gets over a 90 on my scale and it's under $100, it's a must-have for my cabinet. I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a bottle without hesitation. I might buy a second. Not something I do very often. This particular batch is freaking awesome. I mean that. In comparison to the previous batches that I mentioned I've had the 2016 number 6 batch, known as No Hard Times. I liked it a lot. It had a lot of similarities with this, a lot of well-balanced flavors, but I don't think they were quite as cohesive or as intense. I gave it an 86 out of 100. And then I've also had the Booker's 25th Anniversary Edition, which was more of a special release to commemorate the 25th anniversary of Booker No, I think. Honestly, I didn't do enough research to figure out what it was commemorating, but it was Booker's 25th anniversary. That one I actually only gave a 77 out of 100. I thought it was very dry, very oaky. It just wasn't quite my cup of tea. So there is variation amongst Booker's batches, but that said, you're going to get a common core of flavors. The things around the edges are what's going to vary. I haven't had a bad Booker's batch yet. Of those 3, funnily enough, I don't know if that's a word. Funny enough, the most expensive one, the 25th anniversary, was my least favorite. This stuff is fantastic. No Hard Times 2016-6 would also have a hearty recommendation from me. And given my experience with these Booker's batches, I would also, without hesitation, go forth and buy new batches as they continue to come out 4 times a year now, especially if I can find them, preferably under 65, but definitely under 70 bucks. Last thing I'll touch on, I know this video is getting long. Compared to its peers, Maker's Mark Cask Strength, Stag Junior, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, I like Booker's the best. I've had 3 batches of Stag Junior. I've only had 1 batch of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. Far and away, this specific Booker's tops them all. But even the last batch I had, the No Hard Times, still topped them all. It was pretty close with the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof that I had. I don't remember what batch. But overall, I think this offers the most balanced flavors. It offers the most complex flavors. Stag Junior and Elijah Craig both kind of have their own unique profiles. Both of them are good, but neither of them gets you as well-rounded of a flavor profile as I find in Booker's. That's all I've got for tonight. Let's wrap it up. We're going on 18 minutes. I will see you guys next week for another whiskey review. Have a fantastic evening.